So back on Joe Biden. Now, I don't want to look at this whole thing through one lens. That's kind of where I'm getting at here because it's important to try to see everything from all sides. On one hand, this is a rape allegation, a serious allegation which should be taken seriously. On the other hand, it is politically motivated. It's being pushed by people who want Bernie to win. So by definition, it is politically motivated and being pushed for those reasons. So that being said, as progressives, what do you think is the smartest move for us to handle this?
It's an interesting question because I think there's two parts to it. One is the political strategy. Are we going to take advantage of something that, may or may not be true at this point? I think I tend to, based on what I've heard from the story and my, perception of Joe Biden and his behavior, I wouldn't be surprised if this were true. But yeah, you can see someone like Trump using this in a nefarious way, right? Grabbing this story, whether it's true or not, and just like hammering at it just for politics. And I can see the argument of someone on our side who would say, yeah, even you said, look at what we're fighting look at what we're up against in this fight as progressives. Wouldn't we have to use every tool? But I think the other side is just sticking to our principles, right? I mean, we want the truth in this situation. And I think, politically, as someone on the left, what I focus on in this story is a double standard, right? You even mentioned it before, Trump, he said grab him by the pussy. Now we have an allegation that Joe Biden literally grabbed someone by the pussy. Where's the outrage? Where's the media coverage? Where's the investigation? The fact that Katie Halper and Crystal Ball, with due respect to them, I love them, they're the first to get this interview. I think it's an embarrassment, right? Like, we need CNN, we need New York Times. And I guess, I don't know if you read the Salon piece that Crystal referred to in her show this morning, but there is an attempt to say basically that those hard-hitting reporters in the New York Times really need to vet something like this if they're going to report on it. But, have they even tried? Have they attempted? I haven't seen any attempt. This has been, as you mentioned, she's been trying to tell this story for months, and there's crickets. And now they say, why now, right? But, when she came back 6 months ago to try to get, even from political campaigns, when it was less clear that Joe Biden was the front runner, less clear that he was going to be the one to beat Trump, right? It was still open. People like Pete, people like Kamala, they were still in there. So that could have been something that they would use. And again, we don't have to be nefarious about it. We can say, hey, she is one of a few women who has alleged this misconduct. And, it's the little things. Sometimes, it's the little things, touching your neck and being that, we see him sniffing. So it's reasonable to assume that it's true. And we can try to hold those media personalities accountable and say, hey, if you're going to have an outrage over somebody that says grab him by the pussy, and now you have somebody going against that guy who literally has an allegation of him grabbing by the pussy, you should probably, be fair and cover it. But yeah, I mean, personally, I don't mind using it politically a little bit, right? I mean, we don't have to. We have to know that it's true first, but I think we can point out this hypocrisy and use that politically. This is a perfect example of that kind of hypocrisy in the media. Interesting question for sure.
And in no way am I doubting the validity of the accusations. I said it earlier on the show that there are obviously reasons that Tara Reid should be taken seriously, considering the amount of mainstream media press that has completely ignored this story, like you just said, which is something I think is just as incriminating when the media chooses not to air a story. That always has red paint, all over it, in my opinion. But it seems like, and I was alluding to this earlier, it seems like when progressives fight back, the establishment comes back and fights sometimes even harder. So do you think that this could easily be turned around on Bernie Sanders or the next Bernie Sanders?
I think that, yes, it can. I think you even mentioned, thanks to Elizabeth Warren, over a conversation that also had no other witnesses, we think he's a sexist now. So, I mean, that's the perfect example that I would think of a thought experiment and say, okay, what if this did happen to Bernie Sanders? When all these tiny things come out that are not even close to an actual sexual assault allegation from somebody who's been sniffing women's hair on live national television, yeah, of course, they would completely weaponize it. And I think, even further, I'd say probably they'd weaponize anything, right? They've already proven that. So in that case, when I'm thinking about that backlash, they're definitely going to respond. You say, and I would say they're definitely going to respond harder. You say they may respond stronger. I think they've proven that they've been way stronger than us in every fight, right? We kind of cower to this, it's a slippery slope in one direction, but we always cower to these attacks and are playing defense, right? And I think we can just stick to truth, right? We don't have to say, again, like, oh, Joe Biden shouldn't be president because he sexually assaulted this person, allegedly. But you can say, yeah, Joe Biden's a pretty creepy dude, and you better believe that's going to be in a Trump ad. So, politically, it probably makes no sense to pick this guy who is falling apart on TV, and that they don't seem to care about that. But if they really were, ardent in their principles in the Me Too movement, if they cared about these issues, they would stand with it regardless. And I don't know, in the Intercept piece, Ryan Grimm said he talked to a legal expert and basically said, yeah, they could have made a case for this, right? So it's like that their nonprofit status wasn't really in play. It was really this bowing down to royalty, this basically subconscious knowledge that if you come out against Joe Biden in this time, you're going to get a media barrage. You're going to get the backlash from the establishment. But I think we need to fight that, and we need to set a precedent. I don't want to get into another news story, but with AOC's recent pivot, I think it's especially important for us to stay strong, right? Stay strong into the pursuit of the truth, but certainly to stay strong.
So you would definitely agree that you don't just look at it as this is something that we need to use to fight against the establishment. Your view on it is you kind of look at both sides too. Let's not get too deep without too much evidence, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, before I heard this story, even when I heard it, I kind of just listened to her accounts, and I wanted to make sure, but it kind of like went under the radar to me because we've just proven that we don't care about this stuff. Like the backlash to Ryan Grimm saying, "Oh, it's the Intercept that's reporting this." He reported on the Kavanaugh story, and everybody did wall-to-wall coverage on Kavanaugh. I mean, it was like 2 weeks nonstop. So we got to stick to like you said.
Definitely all the.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was basically just going to say all the smearing on the Intercept, I think, is just so ingenuous because they've done work clearly on both sides of every issue. They have great journalists. Whenever they can find a story that they dislike and then they smear the Intercept. Glenn Greenwald helping Julian Assange. I saw that in the Salon article. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I think what's interesting is that they also, as people in the media, are aware that they don't really do journalism, right? When was the last time we saw original reporting from CNN or MSNBC that wasn't like, the line of whatever establishment politicians they have access to, right? Like they look at someone like that and it's like, oh, look, real journalism, real investigation, real talking to people and trying to, find the details. I mean, they don't care. I mean, you remember that question to Bernie Sanders where he's like, oh, did Bernie Sanders say this? And she pivots and says, why were you so mad that Bernie Sanders said this? I mean, that's clearly right there. There's no journalism. We're not asking questions to find out the truth. We're just setting a narrative. And again, like to address the Salon piece, it's not a conspiracy. There's no like people rubbing their hands together in the back smoke-filled room. But it's an unheard consensus that, he's the best chance to beat Trump. We need access. If he's president, we need to retain access. We're insiders, as the head of MSNBC told Cenk. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, and it's why our shows exist, is because this is such a desert, as I say, of ideology. There's no principles anymore, right? If it's, you said, where I'll end my thought here, you said, anyway, just because this guy ran for president, they don't quite care anymore. Well, it's not only that, but it's someone who's running for president on their side, because if it was Trump, who cares? You know what I mean? They'll go off.
And he's also part of the club.
Well, and I'm glad you said that. I mean, I actually think that that's a really important, it's a time to post jokes, we said, but, when we look at people like George Carlin, they are probably the most in tune. I think that's why we like Jimmy Dore, because they're the least susceptible to saying bullshit, because, when you're a comedian like that, you just kind of have to see through the bullshit. And so that big club is an image I use a lot, because it's like, these people are actually hanging out together. You see pictures of them in the same golf clubs and the same, cocktail parties, and that's why it becomes real. So when you're, that connection, another nefarious detail, I don't know if you mentioned it in your talk, but Anita Hill, who was the head of this PR firm that helped Time's Up, and she, lo and behold, is one of the senior advisors to Joe Biden. So, I mean, it is a club. It's this, Sagar said it's an interconnected web of lies. It's all these people working together, and it's high school. We know how this works. We've all been to high school.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And hey, I think I pretty much think we as progressives need to make sure that we're taking each fight with a grain of salt. I mean, even with this thing, and I haven't been checking Twitter all that much during this pandemic thing, just because everything's kind of crazy right now. But there's this one thing where the hashtag Where's Biden, and again, I mean, it's in one way it's true. I mean, this is your leading candidate for president, and he's missing. But in another way, it's like I feel like progressives are just grabbing for every opportunity they can to pick, to find an argument to use. And, the fact that Biden is just kind of, at his quarantine at his home like the rest of us, I don't think necessarily it's the best fight to take against the establishment. But I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I think there is a tendency to lay off, right? And Bernie is the first person to do this, right? He says my friend Joe all the time. He would not approve of kind of going after him in that respect. I think Where's Joe is warranted in the sense that where's his plan? He goes on his few media appearances, he falls apart by the seams and has no plan and no articulation of where he can actually move. And he's not exhibiting the leadership that should be getting him past Trump in the polls, strongly, but also, we have 60%, the latest poll I saw, of the approval of Trump's handling of the crisis. I mean, this guy is a guy who spent a whole month just completely lying about the existence of the virus, how much our testing capacity, and so it's like, where is the alternative? That's why we keep losing. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the campaign is still going on, right? There still are primaries to be fought. I mean, I'm a volunteer for Bernie Sanders. Clearly, I have support. You may see if I tilt myself a bit. So there are people. I went on my podcast and yeah. But I went on my podcast and said that it was pretty much over, right? And I understand that there's a tendency for an argument like that to be like, yeah, especially when I'm trying to beat Trump, let's not try to find every little bit and try to go for the most truthful thing and the most corroborated thing or the most with weight thing to go after him. But Bernie Sanders doesn't do that either. So like, who's going to do it? And the problem really is like they can just smear it as Bernie Bros. The fact that it's a hashtag on Twitter is like it's useless. There's no action behind it. And I guess like it's really for us as progressives, we have to look at ourselves as organizers. Like where can we take action in the sense where can we I guess use our media together collectively and kind of start setting the narrative. That's a challenge that Kyle Kalinske keeps talking about, and I hope that we can start contributing to that conversation.
Hey, I think you bring up a great point, especially with how the establishment loyalists, I guess, use the whole Bernie bro thing as their line of attack, and I guess we don't want to stoop down to their level and try to find the littlest crumbs to kind of attack the other side as well. So I think very well spoken. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Let's do many, many more. Is there anything you wanted to plug before we go?
Shepherd Musings is my podcast. You can find me on Twitter, ROEIHOORY. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that we can't forget Joe Biden himself. He said, if a woman comes out and has an allegation, you should probably believe her. So, I'm going to listen to Joe on this one, and I'll believe her.
That's a great point.